The Callisto Protocol is not that bad. It's just bare bones. I finished the Callisto Protocol a few days ago, and I thought I'd throw my opinion into the ring. I know, told nobody reviewing this game. Pretty cool, I know. Either way, I wanted to get my thoughts up to someone who would listen, because I'm here to be that 1 or 100th contrarian who's here to tell you that the game isn't that bad. In fact, it's quite good in a few areas. It's just that parts where it's lacking are very, very noticeable. Quick aside, it sucks that this game's release on PC was so buggy. I hate playing a game in single-digit frame rates too, but at the very least they're trying to fix the damn thing, so it's better than nothing. Whatever. Also, big spoilers are ahead, so anyone who doesn't care about that, get lost. Okay, let's get started. So there is this expectation that this game is going to be scary. I don't know what everyone else was smoking, but I think I should call my biases right away. Callisto isn't scary. It's too loud in your face to be scary. It's gory, yes. It's gruesome and graphic and startling, but in my opinion, Callisto and its predecessor Dead Space are the equivalent of a funhouse with a sci-fi horror aesthetic instead of a haunted mansion. It's expensive looking and well produced that things jump out and go boo, but it's not too upsetting or obtuse to scare away the standard consumer. There are a few moments where the game slows down and doesn't have something screaming in your face or ripping your eyes out. Those are cool. Otherwise, this game is more preoccupied with just grossing you out. I guess it's easier to do in an action game. There's more feedback and gore and more readily available visual elements to draw from, but those who are claiming that this game wasn't nearly as scary as Dead Space may need to replay it after consuming a bit more horror before considering it scary. Also, side note, for anyone who thinks that this game isn't scary because there's melee combat, I guess we're all going to conveniently forget about the Condemned games. What's shocking playing Callisto is seeing how frugal its arsenal is compared to its predecessor. There's a gravity gun, yes, but it feels limited and not a little clumsy to use. The guns are passable, but boil down to pistol, shotgun, assault rifle, or variations of such. Otherwise, the game consists of these boxing matches with the various monsters infesting the prison. The combat system is admittingly frustrating at first, but it is incredibly generous when you realize that you literally have to just hold left or right and you'll dodge. It works like magic every time. Literally, the minute enemies start attacking, just start strafing, and you'll dodge. Everyone who thinks this is frustrating need only do that, and you're golden. A lot of the battles boil down to this, barring the times when you fight more than one enemy. It gets irritating when you think you've got one of the enemies dead to rights and they bitch slap you and you watch the same overblown death animation you've seen the past 4 freaking times this playthrough, but that's what guns are for, right? The melee combat is simplistic, sure, but at the very least it's satisfying. It's always fun to smash monsters to bits. It excites my lizard brain. On the subject of combat, for a game that has as much production value as this one, I'm shocked there's only 7 enemy types? I had to compare this to Dead Space again, but in that game alone there was the regular slasher enemies, the babies that shot poisonous barbs, the tall creatures that split apart into little bastards that you can kick like footballs, morbidly obese guys that made little vermin. That's not even counting the Regenerator, the Leviathan, even that annoying tentacle that drags you around. That was all in the first game alone. Callisto, on the other hand, has normal goo man, bigger goo man, spitter goo man, blind goo man, crawling visible goo man, who's probably the coolest enemy in the game, podhead thing, which are literally the worst things in the world, the bugs that jump out of chests and lockers, and a 2-headed big mini-boss that they used not once, not twice, but 3 times towards the end of the game. There's also security robots that appear for all of 2 sections that serve as rudimentary stealth segments, but those are over so quick that there isn't much reason to count them as anything other than environmental hazards. Don't get me wrong, it's fun to blow off limbs and you can throw fools into fans or spikes with your little gravity gun, but there's not much else to fight. You're fighting basically the same 3 enemy types the entire game, and good luck fighting more than one guy in melee. Frustrations really build when tiny issues end up making the experience more frustrating than it needs to be. For example, why isn't there a quick heal command? It makes encounters far too frustrating for what should be a simple combat loop. I get the game's going for a desperate seat-of-your-pants feeling, but having a button where you could quickly heal during or after a combat encounter would have been a huge boon. The same goes for recharging your gravity gun, which again is a single-use item which inexplicably takes a single button press, while the health pack has a dedicated animation. A proper lock-on system would have been appreciated as well, aside from this quick aim action you can perform when you score a full combo on an enemy. It would make the times fighting more than one enemy a little easier rather than tedious and annoying, because trust me, when you're stuck against the wall and 3 guys are ganking you into oblivion, it really starts to test your patience. Another thing this game has are long crawling segments when you're locked into a single area, limited just pressing forward. I didn't really have a problem with them, unlike many people on this platform, because it meant at least I was safe and it was a disguised loading screen. My only real gripe is that you could have really scared the player with a moment where that safety is violated, like saying one of the monsters starts crawling after you in this segment and you can only move at a snail's pace. That would be terrifying. It would be a genuine moment of terror and stoke a bit of paranoia even if it only ever happened once. At least it would be unexpected, which this game seems to have trouble with. When I saw the first teaser and that first gross tentacle monster, I knew roughly what we were getting into. This was made by one of the guys that worked on the original Dead Space. If you know anything about Dead Space, then you know the vibe Striking Distance was ultimately going for. The same sci-fi horror aesthetic lifted from every 80s B-movie horror that appeared in the wake of Alien's success. Grungy industrial spaceship corridors, blue-collar spaceship workers, your evil omnipresent corporations that control every aspect of your life, a monster or scary artifact that is gooey, possibly phallic in nature, and may or may not be cousins with John Carpenter's The Thing, bonus points of their eggs or little parasites that jump out and gnaw on your face. Them's the basic elements I've come to expect. Your event horizons, your things, your aliens, etc. ad infinitum. I get it, it's a vibe, and one that I'm very familiar with. I've seen a few Alien rip-offs in my time. I like the whole grungy sci-fi look. I'm fine with something familiar if you can do something at least interesting with it. Now, the plot of this game concerns Jacob Lee, played by Josh Duhamel, aka that guy from the Transformers movies, who Michael Bay really wanted to make the movie about because he was cool military man and Shia LaBeouf was soy boy cuck beta, who finds himself imprisoned in Black Iron, a dystopian prison straight out of Judge Dredd on the frozen moon of Callisto. It's the 24th century and shit is bad. Humanity has colonized the moons of Jupiter, and a mega corporation called the United Jupiter Company, or UJC, runs everything. Their logos are literally everywhere to the point where the company is practically a sovereign nation. Judging from the distance to Earth, we can assume they're treated as such. The game takes place in and around and below Black Iron, because as it turns out, this place has a dark secret literally buried under everyone's feet. 75 years ago, before the events of the game, there was a terraforming project underway to turn the planet's atmosphere habitable, but the colonists predictably dug too deep and accidentally uncovered a massive alien beast living under the ice that released a parasite known as the biophage and infected the entire population of the colony. The UJC covered it up by killing everyone who knew about it, but discovered that someone who somehow survived the virus mutated into something other than a gross goo monster. From there, the company decided to build a massive prison on top of the ruins of the mining colony, and since then have been using the prisoners as free test subjects. Cut to the current warden, Duncan Cole, who is part of an evil secret society that wants to evolve humanity to better colonize space. Cole gets it in his head that he needs to replicate the conditions of the original outbreak to discover a new survivor, so he releases the virus, cue the events of the game. The basic plot and setting of the game. Pretty standard stuff when spelled out like this. Sure, the main villain is basically Black Albert Wesker crossed with Andrew Ryan, a megalomaniac with an intercom who goes on verbose speeches about choosing to become more than oneself and junk like that. The setting is somewhere between Alien and The Expanse, and the main plot and characters are straight out of a Resident Evil game, and the monsters are basically just John Carpenter's The Thing but multiplied, but with a bit more detail it can be fleshed out into something unique. But as it stands now, the setting is bare bones at best. Despite being about as derivative as this game, Dead Space had some unique ideas in the form of unitology, the scam religion that just so happens to be right about alien life, except these aliens want to eat you instead of taking your money. Dead Space was by no means original, with its original story bearing more in common with the cult 90s film Event Horizon, which is not as good as you remember, trust me, but it embraced its influences film and game-wise and ended up beloved. Callisto does that to a degree, but forgets to give much else besides the immediate necessary details. This plot is so singular and focused that it feels myopic at times, that is, too narrow for its own good. What little information we get outside of the main plot is sadly very scant. We know that there are other planets that were terraformed, but we don't see anything outside of an opening cutscene that depicts exactly one Blade Runner-esque city street. We don't find out what things are like Earthside, what the conditions on other planets are like, not even what life in this prison is like before the plot gets going. Literally right after Jacob crashes on the moon, he's captured and made a prisoner, then he passes out, and the next time he wakes up, the outbreak has already begun. There's very little time for you to breathe or get immersed in this world, so it ends up feeling more like a theme park ride than an experience of this new universe. Even the audio logs don't tell you much about the world. It's mainly the last moments of characters before they die. There's a specific element of this world that feels like it was meant to play a larger role, but just never does. The core, the health bar on the back of your neck, apparently allows users to download memories from other people's cores, but that function is brought up about twice in the entire game and then is rendered largely irrelevant afterwards. It feels like something that might have been cut down from something bigger, because that's a shockingly useful and powerful tool, especially in a sci-fi horror context, to just write off in a single scene and never return to. This brings me to the characters of the game. They're all decently acted and animated, but like the rest of the game, they're all basic in their execution. Josh Duhamel is reasonably likable, but is basically an off-duty space marine who's way more sweaty than scared. Karen.
This is Katana!
Fukuhara is action girl with a chip on her shoulder. There's Black Albert Wesker, and then there's this guy named Elias who is Cockney.
Well, look, I've been here forever. Right, I've got all the information on this place and I can get us to the hangar, right?
The only character who seems like he's written or performed with any kind of exuberance is the British corrections officer Ferris, played by our man Starkiller. He eventually becomes a tyrant-style enemy who you fight a grand total of 2 times, both relegated to the back half of the game. It feels like this character was meant to have a larger role, but again, like the core, his scenes were either cut down or Starkiller was too expensive and they just said, it's fine. Seriously, whenever this guy's on screen, the game instantly rises to amazing.
How the fuck did you get in here?
Think I got time for this shit? Okay.
Honestly, I see an alternate story where this character appears more frequently throughout the game. His interactions with Jacob becoming more and more antagonistic, gradually building a rivalry between these two characters. Maybe we have a section early on in the game before the outbreak occurs where Ferris targets Jacob explicitly out in the prison yard or something. Then when the goo monsters start appearing, he chases Jacob down while fighting off the monsters as he's so hell-bent on still doing his job. Then later on, when Ferris gets infected, he gradually transforms into a literal monster who Jacob finally gets to take down after an entire game of running away. Yeah, I know that's basically the Tyrant and Mr. X and Nemesis, but that worked for a reason. There's a clear sense of build-up and eventual catharsis, and that feels good. Instead, he just shows up sporadically, being more and more zombified until he's a hulking brute you fight a grand total of 1.5 times, then he inexplicably turns into a giant snot monster. Seriously, it's never explained why he just suddenly hulks out. Then you beat him, and then the game's over. Damn it, game, you wasted your Sam Witwer. Never waste Sam Witwer. The wasting of voices of Emperor Palpatine aside, one of the biggest missteps with this game, in my opinion, is the supposed big twist near the end of the game. So there is a bioterrorist attack at the beginning of the game, in which a city on the planet Europa is attacked and a bunch of people die. Then as we follow Jacob through the prison, he starts having visions related to the attack, as well as seeing the mangled corpse of his co-pilot buddy, who appears whenever Jacob denies having any knowledge of the incident. Jacob's friend, Shock of Shock, is a manifestation of his guilt with the involvement with the Europa attack. Turns out, Jacob was hired to transport samples of the virus across the moons to facilitate various bioattacks that were committed by the UJC, who blamed it on a supposed terrorist cell called the Outer Way. He willingly turns a blind eye despite his co-pilot getting suspicious about the attacks. So cut to the beginning of the game, and our space truckers are going to pull off one last trip, but the ship ends up crashing on Callisto. Jacob's friend dies, and his mangled corpse ends up haunting him periodically throughout the game until Jacob is forced to realize the gravity of what he was ignoring, and thus seeks to make things right. Now, in theory, this isn't a bad idea for a character arc. The location of the prison recalls punishment and penance, and the shift in geography indicates a descent into a cold, distant hell of a sort. Jacob is figuratively descending into hell to be assailed by demons of a kind, and must come out the other end a changed man or join the dead buried under the prison. But the theme of guilt, which is embodied by this guilt ghost idea, doesn't show up for long stretches of this game. There's a bit at the beginning, there's an area near the middle, there's a couple repetitions of the phrase, "you can't hide from what you've done," with a character who essentially serves as like the conscience, but then of course dies so that our main character has more guilt to deal with. And then there's a bit at the very end. This was meant to be an emotionally impactful subplot, then it falls completely flat because most people who weren't paying attention to it would have likely forgotten about it by that point in the game and be actively asking, why is there a ghost? If this haunting was repeated throughout the game, if Jacob kept seeing visions of his friend in between the goo monster fights, then we can infer both from the gameplay and the narrative that the character is haunted by what he's done, and by extension the death of his friend. But as it stands, the ghost buddy is just something that shows up incidentally whenever it's convenient for the plot. It's like there are blocks on the script for this is gameplay and this is the subplot now. If the aim was to make a story-driven experience, then there needed to be a better structure for it to better reflect this, or just take those elements out altogether. If you're not going to give these story elements the time they need to, establish themselves and have the proper impact on the player, then just ditch them. Though having Josh Duhamel in your game would be hard to just chuck wholesale, so I don't know. The lackluster storytelling is especially surprising because there's an audio drama called Helix Station on the official Striking Distance YouTube channel that tells the exact same story but is way better. It concerns a bounty hunter named Percy, played by Brienne of Tarth, who failed to stop a terrorist attack on a station called Helix Station, resulting in the deaths of literal thousands of colonists. As a result, she's become a drug addict to deal with the constant panic attacks and nightmares. When she's given an assignment to retrieve an apparent escaped prisoner from Black Iron, she must return to Helix Station and is instantly reminded of her terrible mistake. In between that, she finds out that the prisoner is not actually a prisoner, but a scientist who learned about the Warden's plans to use the biophage virus. In the end, Percy must destroy the station, and in doing so, face her guilt head-on, ends up kicking her drug habit, and finds a measure of redemption. In 6 episodes alone, roughly half the time that this game takes to play, we get a complete character arc for Percy, we get incidental details about the setting that further fleshes it out, and we get an exciting, cheesy sci-fi horror plot to boot. And this was done with an audio drama. Imagine how awesome it would have been if there was more of that in the actual game.
This fucking place.
I'm just realizing how horribly negative a lot of the stuff I've said sounds. Here's the thing. I don't hate this game. I sincerely don't. I'm not in the market for excessive negativity or outrage. That's someone else's problem. It's, what is it? Mahler's problem. There are better things to be outraged by in this world, and a video game that did not live up to one single person's idea of absolute quality is not one of them. I'm critical because this game has potential. Yes, it's very similar to Dead Space, but that is a clear intention of the developers, and I am meeting them at that. But potential isn't the same as execution. This game, despite its sizable production value and Hollywood-level marketing, feels timid, afraid in a shocking bit of irony. It feels afraid to really take chances with its gameplay and its storytelling, which is fascinating because Dead Space felt like a more complete experience, and that game came out 14 years ago. It may be a symptom of a trend I've been noticing in mass market entertainment these days. These companies who are so desperate to ensure franchises on the way before the first entry has even been released. They dump so much money into something that ultimately feels like it's just on the edge of being something really special and unique. It's too afraid to scare away every potential buyer, and you end up with a product that feels altogether bland and overly focus tested into marketability perfection. This is just my opinion, of course. That's not to say this game is like that awful Mummy movie that came out 4 years ago. That movie was dead on arrival, haha, especially when you have an elderly man as your sexy lead action hero. The Callisto Protocol is a good first step, but it needs to really bring things up a notch if it wants to continue this universe in any meaningful capacity. For one, maybe expand the gameplay a little, maybe incorporate more interesting guns and enemies, maybe allow us to interact with the environment a little more. The game has basically carte blanche to do whatever it wants with its far future setting and gross shape-shifting enemies, so let's get creative next time. All of this may be due to the fact that this is the first project by a new studio, maybe they rushed certain elements to the last minute, I don't know. Either way, for all its missing pieces, the Callisto Protocol is a good first step, but let's just hope there's more up a second entry's sleeve. Hey, thanks if you've made it this far into the video. Please like and subscribe. I'm not sure what I'm trying to do here, but it's always nice to have someone watch your videos, right? Well, yeah, I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.